So I was telling her about the new shop that opened downtown.
Right.
Oh, the one with the cute dresses?
Em cũng đang được dạy dỗ bạn này.
It's all about how you approach the problem.
He's right, you know.
So I wanted to create a place for people to come and relax and enjoy themselves.
It's so good. I love the texture. It's crunchy and sweet.
I heard the market will be busy today.
Yes, we should try to get there early.
We need to cross the stream to get to the village.
Are you sure it's safe? The current looks strong.
We're here in the heart of the jungle, exploring the local flora and fauna.
We need to discuss the new project timeline.
I agree. The current deadlines are a bit tight.
We need to cross the stream to get to the village.
Are you sure it's safe? The current looks strong.
The late afternoon sun painted the quiet countryside in warm shades of gold as Hang's adoptive mother slowly made her way along the familiar path that led to her daughter's home. Time had etched lines on her face, and her steps were slower now, but there was a sense of determination in her eyes. She had not visited in a long while, and today, something in her heart urged her to go. The moment she arrived, she stood still at the gate, astonished. The once modest home of her daughter and son-in-law had changed completely. The roof was newly built, the walls freshly painted, the yard expanded with tidy rows of vegetables, and even a small pond that shimmered in the light. For a moment, she could hardly believe this was the same house she remembered. The transformation struck her deeply, and she felt both proud and curious about how her children had managed such progress. Inside, Hang and her husband welcomed her warmly. They offered her water, invited her to sit, and quickly explained the many changes that had happened in her absence. The fields had been improved, irrigation had been fixed, and they were slowly building a more secure future for themselves. Her heart swelled with pride, and she couldn't help but smile at the sight of her daughter's happiness. Yet, beneath that smile, a shadow of guilt lingered. Memories of past mistakes, moments when her harshness and poor choices had hurt her family. She tried to push those thoughts aside, determined to focus on the present. As they spoke, Hang's mother admitted that she had another purpose for her visit. With some hesitation, she revealed that she wanted to see her old acquaintance, a woman who had once been a close part of the family, but had since fallen into trouble and prison. The request surprised Hang and her husband, but they agreed to take her there. She said it had been far too long, and she needed to see for herself how that woman was doing after all these years. Later that afternoon, they set out. The air was heavy with the scent of earth after a light rain. The roads were damp, the leaves still dripping, and the countryside quiet except for the occasional bird call. When they arrived at the modest home, the air seemed to thicken with something unspoken. It was there, among greetings and small talk, that Hang's mother's eyes fell on a man standing quietly near the doorway. His presence was unexpected, almost startling. He looked older, the years having carved deep lines into his face, but something about him stirred a forgotten memory. Her heart skipped a beat. She blinked hard, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The curve of his jaw, the way he carried himself, even the faint tone of his voice, it was all too familiar. For a moment, the years peeled away, and she was young again, remembering a man who once held her heart before cruelly abandoning her. She narrowed her eyes, searching for confirmation, and then she saw it, the faint outline of a scar on his knee as he shifted his weight. Her breath caught in her throat. That scar. She remembered the day vividly, the sound of his bicycle crashing against the stones, her frantic hands trying to stop the bleeding, the smell of dust and blood mixing together. She had taken him to get stitches, her heart pounding not only with worry but with love. That scar was something no one else could have known. The man, whose name was Nhat, seemed to grow uneasy under her gaze. He shifted, denied knowing her, insisted she was mistaken, but her conviction only grew stronger. She told the others that he was her ex-lover, the man who had deceived her and left her many years ago. The atmosphere grew tense. Hang's husband tried to smooth things over, suggesting that perhaps she had mistaken him for someone else with the same name. But her words carried the weight of memory, of betrayal that still stung even after all these years. She demanded to see his knee properly to reveal the truth once and for all. He refused, becoming defensive, his face flushing with discomfort. The more he resisted, the more convinced she became. "You can deny me all you want," she said, her voice trembling, "but I remember you. I remember everything." The room was thick with silence, each person caught between disbelief and suspicion. Hang's husband attempted to change the subject, urging everyone to calm down, but the wound of the past had already been reopened. After some time, realizing the situation was becoming unbearable, Hang's mother chose to leave. Her heart was heavy, filled with unanswered questions and the bitter taste of recognition denied. As she walked away from the house, her mind swirled with emotions, anger, sorrow, longing, and above all, the fear that perhaps the past was not as buried as she had thought. Back inside, Nhat let out a long breath, his composure cracking now that she was gone. "Alone," he muttered to himself, confessing in fragments of thought what he had denied aloud. Yes, he had once loved her. Yes, he had betrayed her and walked away without looking back. He had never known if she carried his child, and part of him feared that she had. The memory haunted him still, the choices of his youth coming back to cast shadows over his present. And now, after so many years, fate had cruelly placed them in the same place once more. The days after the unexpected encounter stretched long and uneasy. Hang's adoptive mother could not shake the image of Nhat's face from her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scar on his knee, heard his voice denying her recognition, and felt the sting of betrayal all over again. She had built a life without him, raised children, endured hardships, but seeing him alive and standing in front of her reopened wounds she thought had long healed. The memory of his departure, the loneliness he left behind still cut deeply. She told herself she needed to let it go. The past was the past, and no good would come from dragging it into the present. Yet the unease gnawed at her. What if there was more to his return than coincidence? What if he had come here for a reason, one that might harm her family? The thought unsettled her, and she began to watch her surroundings with new suspicion. Meanwhile, Nhat wrestled with his own demons. In the quiet of his small room, he replayed the encounter in his head again and again. He remembered her laughter when they were young, the way her hand had felt in his, the promises he had made and broken. The years had not erased the shame of his betrayal, nor the guilt of walking away. Now she had recognized him, and though he denied it, he knew she was right. She had always been able to see through him, and if she truly remembered everything, then sooner or later, others would too. Hang noticed her mother's growing silence at home. Normally, she would chatter about the day's chores, the neighbors, the grandchildren. Now she sat for long stretches staring into the distance, lost in thought. Concerned, Hang pressed her gently, asking what troubled her. At first, her mother brushed it off, but eventually the dam broke, and and she confessed everything. The man she had once loved, the betrayal, and the scar that had given him away. Hang listened, shocked. She had known little of her mother's past, never realizing there had been such a painful love story before her father. She tried to comfort her, insisting that perhaps it was indeed a mistake, that the man might only look similar. But her mother shook her head firmly. No, a scar like that cannot be mistaken. It is him, and if he is here, it means the past has come back to test us. Her words weighed heavily on Hang, who began to worry about what this meant for their family. She confided in her husband, who reacted with a mix of skepticism and caution. Even if it is him, he said, what can he do to us now? The past cannot change the present. We have built our lives, and he has no power here. Yet deep inside, he too felt unease. Strangers did not appear in small villages without reason. The tension escalated when Ungiem appeared again, this time in the market. Hang's mother caught sight of him lingering near a stall, watching her from a distance. When she confronted him, he quickly turned away, muttering excuses. But his eyes betrayed something: fear, regret, and perhaps longing. That night, she could not sleep. The memories of their youthful love flooded back with painful clarity. The promises he had made to build a life together, the day he left without explanation, the endless nights of waiting. Now here he was, alive, pretending to be someone else. Her mind wandered further back to the last argument they had shared. She had begged him not to go, but he had chosen another path, one she never fully understood. Some said he left for money, others whispered of debts. She never learned the truth. Seeing him again brought all the questions rushing back. Why had he left? Why had he abandoned her? And most of all, why had fate brought him back into her life now, after so many years? Nhat, on the other hand, knew the answers all too well. He had left out of fear, fear of responsibility, fear of poverty, fear of love that demanded sacrifice. He had been young, foolish, chasing opportunities that turned to dust. He had paid the price, living years of hardship, wandering from place to place. And now, in his old age, the ghosts of his choices stood before him, embodied in the woman who had once trusted him with her heart. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the village quieted, he stood outside her home, hidden in the shadows. He watched her through the window as she moved slowly, tidying the kitchen. She looked older now, her hair streaked with silver, but to him, she was still the girl he had known. His chest ached with unspoken words, apologies that had never been given, but he could not step forward. Cowardice still chained him, just as it had all those years ago. The villagers began to whisper. Rumors spread quickly in a place where everyone knew each other. They said an old flame had returned, that secrets from the past were resurfacing. Some looked at Hang's family with pity, others with curiosity. Hang herself felt torn between protecting her mother's dignity and demanding answers from the man who had caused so much pain. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Hang's mother arranged to meet him alone. She chose a quiet path by the river where they had once walked together in their youth. When he arrived, his eyes avoided hers, but she forced him to look. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice trembling. "Why did you leave me?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of sorrow. He lowered his head, his voice hoarse. "Because I was weak, because I was afraid, because I thought I could find something better, and instead I lost everything." Tears welled in her eyes, not from love, but from the validation of her deepest wound. He had not been taken from her by fate or by circumstance. He had chosen to abandon her, and that truth hurt more than any excuse could. Yet beneath the anger, there was still a flicker of something else. Pity, perhaps, or the faint echo of love that refused to die completely. She told him she did not want him in her life, that he had no place in her family. But he pleaded softly, saying he only wanted forgiveness. a chance to die in peace without the weight of regret. Her heart wavered. Forgiveness was not easy, but neither was carrying hatred forever. She left him there by the river, torn between past and present, her steps heavy with the burden of choice. Back in her home, she told Hang everything. Her daughter listened quietly, then asked the question she herself had been avoiding. Mother, what if he is not here only for forgiveness? What if he wants more? The question lingered in the air, dark and unanswered. The days that followed the riverside confrontation carried the heavy air of unfinished business. Hang's mother tried to return to her routine, caring for her home, her grandchildren, and keeping the household steady, but her heart remained unsettled. She had received an answer from Nhat, but it had been incomplete, shallow, a confession laced with excuses rather than truth. Deep inside, she felt there was still more he was hiding. It was not only the act of leaving all those years ago, it was something darker, a hidden chapter in their story that he feared to reveal. Hang herself grew restless. She could see how the past was eating away at her mother, dragging her into old pain, and she could not bear to watch in silence. One evening, she confronted her mother directly. "You told me what he said, but do you truly believe him? A man who abandons does not return without reason. What if he carries something dangerous with him? What if his presence threatens not only your peace, but also the safety of our family?" Her mother's lips trembled, and she finally admitted the fear she had tried to bury. "I think he wants something from me. I do not know what yet, but I feel it. Otherwise, why would he come back now after all these years?" Meanwhile, Nhat wrestled with his own torment. The guilt was overwhelming, yes, but beneath it lay desperation. He was a man with little time left, his body frail, his days numbered. He had returned not just for forgiveness, but because of something else he had kept hidden for decades. The truth burned within him, demanding to be told. When he left all those years ago, he had not only betrayed a woman's love, he had also abandoned a child. The weight of this secret haunted him at night. He would wake in cold sweats, hearing the cries of the baby he had never held, imagining the pain of the woman he had left behind. He had convinced himself that by disappearing, he had spared them shame, but the reality was crueler. He had condemned them to loneliness and grief. Now, faced with the end of his life, he could no longer bear the silence. One stormy evening, unable to resist any longer, he went again to Hang's house. He stood at the doorway, soaked by rain, begging to speak. Hang tried to turn him away, but her mother, trembling, allowed him inside. The sight of him, frail and broken, filled the room with tension. This time, he did not deny who he was. He admitted everything, that he had once promised her a life, that he had run away for wealth, and that he had failed. Then, his voice cracking, he confessed the secret he had carried alone. "There was a child," he whispered. "Our child. I left before I even knew. And when I returned years later to look for you, you were gone. I never found out what happened. I do not know if the child lived or died or grew up without knowing my face. And I have lived with that shame every day since." The room froze in silence. Hang's mother gasped, her hands clutching her chest. Tears streamed down her face, not only from anger, but from the unbearable ache of memories long suppressed. She had indeed once been pregnant after he left. She had lost that baby in the cruel solitude of her youth, a loss that had nearly broken her. And now, hearing him confess, the pain tore open again like a wound that had never healed. Hang listened in shock. She had never known this side of her mother's story, never known the extent of her suffering. To see her mother now, shaking with grief, was unbearable. She turned on Nhat with fury. "Do you understand what you've done? You not only abandoned her, you destroyed her hope, her chance at joy, her chance at family. You do not deserve forgiveness." Nhat bowed his head, accepting the fury, the condemnation. He did not defend himself. He simply whispered, "I know, and yet I beg. Not for love, not for acceptance, only for forgiveness before I die. I cannot leave this world carrying the weight of what I did." For days afterward, the family was torn. Hang urged her mother to cut him off, to let him leave and never return. But her mother remained silent, trapped in a storm of emotions: hate, sorrow, longing, pity. They clashed inside her until she could not tell one from the other. She could not deny that she had once loved him with all her heart. She could not deny that his betrayal had nearly destroyed her. But she also could not deny that in his frailty, in his broken confession, he was still the same man she had once known. The villagers buzzed with rumors, the story spreading like wildfire. Some pitied Nhat, calling him an old fool chasing ghosts. Others pitied Hang's mother, seeing her dignity dragged back into gossip. A few, older ones who remembered their youthful romance, shook their heads with sadness, muttering that fate had been cruel to both. Finally, after many sleepless nights, she made her decision. She went to find him, this time not by the river, but in the small hut he now lived in on the edge of the village. He was lying weakly on his bed, coughing, his eyes dim. She sat beside him, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. "I cannot erase what you did. I cannot forget the pain you gave me, but I also cannot carry hatred forever. You want forgiveness? I give it. Not for you, but for myself. I forgive you, so that my heart may finally rest." At her words, tears streamed down his face. He reached for her hand, trembling, but she pulled it away gently. "Do not mistake this for love. What we had is gone. I forgive you, but you will never again have a place in my life. Your time here is short. Make peace with yourself and with God, and leave the rest to the earth." He nodded, broken but strangely at peace. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of his sin lift, even if only slightly. He closed his eyes, whispering her name like a prayer. When she returned home, Hang asked her if she regretted giving him that grace. Her mother shook her head. "No, forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means I will no longer let his choices chain me. I choose my family. I choose peace. The past is buried now." The story closed not with reconciliation, not with rekindled love, but with a hard-won freedom. Heem faded into the final days of his life, alone but unburdened, while Hang's mother turned back to her family, carrying scars but no longer bound by bitterness. In the stillness of the night, she sat by her window, gazing at the stars. She whispered to the child she had lost, to the love that had betrayed her, to the life she had built despite it all. "I survived," she murmured, "and that is enough." And with that, the long shadow of the past finally lifted, leaving only the quiet strength of a woman who had endured, and the family who would carry her story forward.